Hello, I am Janalie, and I am thrilled to be hosting this podcast with USA Today Bestselling Author Janalie Youngblood. This has been a long time in the making, hasn't it?
It has. We've been brainstorming this for about a year?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
I think it's been about a year that we talked about doing it with live audiences. We've decided to start with a podcast, and then maybe eventually we'll move to having live audiences. So before we get into reviewing our book, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have always loved to write. Even when I was a little kid, I would write. Let me just say a little bit about Janalie. She's my wonderful daughter-in-law, and my husband says that she's the favorite, and he says that he has two favorites. So I have to concur with that. But it's really fun to be able to do this with you. And Janalie is a teacher.
Yes.
And she teaches fifth grade.
Yes.
And I wanted to kind of set that stage because she knows exactly what I'm talking about. I was one of those kids who, when it was time for recess, I would take my book and I would go out and read.
Yeah.
And so that was me. And so I guess it was just natural that I would end up one day writing because I always love reading and love writing too. I remember when I was in the first grade, we were asked to write a poem. And so I did, and I didn't think anything about it. And then later I overheard my mom reading it to my dad, and she was really impressed with it. And I thought, oh, I just assumed that everybody could write. I didn't think I was special or any, I think as a kid, you just think if you do something, everybody else should be able to do it too.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my first inclination of, oh, maybe I should explore this a little bit more, even way back then.
Yeah, that's awesome. So did you have a mentor or a teacher that helped to inspire you, or was it just something you started doing?
A little bit of both. It was something that I started doing and always wanted to do. But when I was in high school, I had this amazing English teacher, and she was very kind. And she's actually a friend of mine even now. I would write little segments and give them to her, and she would critique them. And she was always very encouraging. And she has been one of my biggest supporters. And so, yes, I think I have to attribute a lot of that to her.
Yeah, that's awesome. So at this point, how many books have you written?
So I was thinking about that before we were doing the podcast, and with me not being a numbers person, I was like, how many have I written? And I think it's just a little over 70.
Wow,
and
that's amazing.
Yes, I think soon to be in the low 70s because I've got a few more coming out pretty soon.
That's awesome. And what genre are the majority of your books?
So it's interesting because they are all romance, every one of them, but I do really love suspense. So a lot of mine are suspense. And I've recently started into a little bit of women's fiction and suspense, which ironically is how I started out. I started out very literary. So it's almost like I'm coming full circle.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I also have been doing some rom-coms, which I'm really liking. They're in first person, and it's been really fun.
Good. And it's probably a challenge too, because instead of writing in third person, you have to take the perspective of your characters and make sure that you're telling their story from their point of view instead of just anybody standing back.
That is very well said. As a matter of fact, the one that I'm writing now, I don't want to pigeonhole myself for sure, but I'm going to try to write it in the guy's point of view and the girl's point of view. This morning I was thinking, how am I going to write through this guy's point of view? Yeah. And he's a little bit of a playboy, at first. And so I was thinking, oh my goodness, how do I do that? And how do I make it real to his thoughts and what he would really think? So the jury's out. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's awesome though. And where can readers find your books?
So all of my books are on Amazon. So if they type in my name, they'll come up on Amazon. And then a few of them are wide, which they're in other retailers also. Okay. And then they can also go to my website, JenniferYoungblood.com, and they can join my newsletter and get a free book, and then they can find out a little bit more about the books that way too.
Okay, perfect. And we will link that website in our show notes also, so that people can just go straight to that. And you also have a Facebook and an Instagram that people can follow as well, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. Okay, so today during our Blue Chair book review, we are going to be talking about your book, Beastly Charm. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction on that before we start our review. So this is from the back of the book and the Amazon description. So it says, fans of contemporary Christian romance will fall in love with this fairy tale retelling of Beauty and the Beast. A smart and tender love story with lots of sizzle, set against the splendid backdrop of a sweeping, timeless mansion. High-powered real estate executive Belle Montrose has a lot riding on a deal that must take place or else her career will crumble. Only one man stands in her way, the elusive Sebastian Blake, heir to the valuable Rosewood estate. When Sebastian offers Belle a deal she cannot refuse, she's drawn into his world, an intoxicating world of charm, romance, roses, and dancing. And try as she might, she can't fight the incredible attraction she feels for Sebastian. Will she risk everything for the man whose beastly charm is captivating her heart, or will her head win out in the end? So why don't you tell me a little bit about Beastly Charm?
This was my first fairy tale retelling, and I've always loved Beauty and the Beast, and I've always loved fairy tales. And I would always just imagine, what would it be like to jump in the pages and live that fairy tale? And so, but I wanted to do something, a contemporary romance, and then pattern it after Beastly Charm. It was just really fun because it made me incorporate elements that I might not have thought to incorporate otherwise. But yet the story took a turn all on its own. It was kind of a fun adventure to do that.
That's cool. We have our main characters. We have Belle, and then we have Sebastian. So in the actual story of Beauty and the Beast, their meeting is not typically a happy one. So did you keep that element in this story as well?
I did. As a matter of fact, when Belle first gets to the mansion, Sebastian, she's been trying to contact him because she's got a buyer for the mansion, and there's a little bit of mystery surrounding that too that unfolds as the novel takes place. But, she goes because she keeps trying to contact him, and he cancels, like they were supposed to do a conference call, and he cancels. And so she decides to just go. And so she drives 4.5 hours from St. George to Park City, Utah, where it takes place. And then it happens to be coming a blizzard, and she's sick the whole time from the start of the novel. She's got a little bit of a tickle in her throat, and then by the time she gets to the mansion, she's got chills, so she suspects that she has a fever.
Right.
But she goes in anyway, and then she ends up talking to someone on the phone, and when Sebastian comes in, he overhears her. And she says some pretty negative things about him, and because his butler, Alistair, who's also a family friend, answers the door. And he's very formal, and so he almost acts like that Belle is seeking an audience with the king.
Oh, yeah.
And so she mentions something about that. And then Sebastian comes in, and of course he overhears her, and they have a huge fight about it. And then she tells him that he's a beast, and he tells her, well, if I'm a beast, you're no beauty. And so she gets upset, and at that point she runs out, and anyway, then she ends up having a wreck. And so that's kind of where the story starts.
So you said that you loved fairy tales. So what are some of your favorite fairy tales?
Well, I really like the classics. I mean, Cinderella, how can you go wrong with that one, right? I think we've all found ourselves in Cinderella's shoes, no pun intended, right?
Yes.
Especially with the evil stepsisters and her having to do all the work and feeling like she's getting none of the credit. So that's definitely one of my favorites. I also love Rapunzel. I've always been fascinated with her having the long hair and letting it down and him climbing up.
Yeah.
And then it's also given me a different look about greens, I don't know if the fairy tale states what types of greens they are, but I think of I love it's being a Southern girl, I love turnip greens, and and I'm thinking, kind of how the story of Rapunzel starts, where her mother is pregnant with her and craving those greens, and then she gets her husband to go and pick them, and of course that's when the evil enchantress puts the spell and takes Rapunzel away to the castle. But that's definitely one of my favorites.
And then, did you bring any aspects of the fairy tale into this book?
I did. I brought in the aspect of there's Belle with her father, so that aspect is there, and then she goes to the castle because her father has something to do with the deal that she wants to take place and seal. And so I added that aspect. Sebastian's mother, Charlotte, she has since passed away previous to the start of the novel, but she has a prize rose garden because I wanted to bring the roses in.
Right, yeah.
And then Sebastian ends up trying to get Belle to stay for a little bit longer because he wants to convince her of how amazing the castle is and or the mansion, and see if he can enlist her help to save it, because it's kind of in jeopardy at the start of the novel. And so I wanted to do that. And then he's hosting a masquerade party. He wants her to dance the opening waltz with him.
Oh, okay.
And so there's that element also.
Cool.
And then one thing too, so there's usually like a magical element of fairy tales.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that, but I didn't want it to be over the top.
Right.
And so, Belle is very, very sick. I had her having a dream about Sebastian's mother. And of course, she's since passed away and doesn't realize who the woman is until later. Because I wanted to bring in just a touch, but not overdo it.
Right. You wanted it to be believable, but not like...
Yeah.
That where people would look at it and be like, oh, this is not real. This couldn't have actually happened.
Yes.
So you've talked a lot about Belle. Could you describe Belle as a character in this story for us?
Well, I did make her look very similar to the Belle in the fairy tale. And I wanted her to have the dark hair and the dark eyes, but she's very driven. She's very driven in her career. She has worked her way up from being a secretary at the Realty Group where she works, and now she's poised to where her father owns it, and she's poised to where he's about to let her take over. And so she's got a lot riding on this deal.
Yeah.
And she's kind of she's lost her mother, and she has a sister named Daphne, and she feels like that Daphne is just a spoiled brat. She feels like Daphne has never worked a day in her life and doesn't appreciate anything. And so she kind of goes overboard. And her relationship with her father is a little bit tenuous. It's mostly revolves around work.
Oh, okay.
And so I think Belle gets a lot of her self-worth through work, which is why she's so driven, because she's supposed to go on a cruise, and she's right at the start of the novel. And then when Sebastian won't answer the conference call, she jumps in the car and decides to go take matters in her own hands.
Oh, okay.
And so, for her, career is everything.
Yeah, very career driven. What about Sebastian? Could you describe Sebastian for us?
So I wanted him to have that old world aristocratic element. So he's kind of a little bit of a mysterious character, and he almost seems like he could be from another world. His mother Charlotte came from a long line of British royalty, and so he's very cultured. He's very charming when he wants to be.
Yeah.
But he can also be beastly. I did make him the brooding character, and so very much the beast. But then just needs the right girl, right, to bring out the prince, so to speak.
Yes.
But of course, Sebastian feels like he's backed in a corner because his mother had so that the name of the mansion is called Rosewood, and his mother had turned it into a finishing school. And then, of course, in today's world, you can imagine you don't get many takers on that.
Right.
And so it's starting to languish. And so it's almost like this, he kind of represents a little bit of this old world that's starting to crumble and ruins, but yet it's magnificent. And he doesn't really want to let go of the old to embrace the new. And he certainly doesn't want to have to sell the mansion and see it chopped up into little bits or developed into some resort or hotel or something like that.
Right. So he's having a hard time letting go of the past, as well as kind of welcoming the future, what it could bring, letting go of it. So Sebastian talks Belle into staying at the mansion for a couple of weeks so that she can get a feel for the grandeur of the place. How does this impact their relationship?
It's interesting because Belle is got the flu, and then she has the wreck, and then Sebastian actually nurses her back to health. And so she's kind of in this interesting position to where she thinks this guy's awful. Right. And then she's completely at his mercy, and then realizes that he's actually very kind. And so she starts initially, she agrees, he makes her a deal, and she agrees to stay. But it doesn't take long before she becomes enamored also. She starts to realize that maybe there's more to life than work. Right. And that maybe there is something to Rosewood. And then of course she starts to develop feelings pretty quickly for Sebastian. And it doesn't hurt that he's devastatingly handsome.
Yes. So you said that she starts to kind of develop these feelings. How does her perception of Sebastian change during her stay at the mansion?
So at first, I think she's frustrated with him because he's an obstacle that's standing in the way of what she wants. And she starts realizing that okay, maybe he has things that he needs too, or maybe his needs and wants have value also. So she starts to shift her perspective and starts to question, well, maybe this mansion shouldn't be sold. Maybe we need to try to find an investor to try to help revitalize it instead of just tearing it down. And she also starts to think about her own relationship with her dad and with her sister. And she starts to wish that they had a better relationship. She starts to think, life is short, and we have each other, and they've been so focused on the superficial that's consumed her. So she really starts to look at herself through a different light also.
It's amazing what happens when you take a break from work, because she's not with all the speed of everything, and so she's taking, I know she's there for work, but she's taking a break and kind of seeing that there's more to life than just work all the time. So what obstacles are standing in the way of Belle and Sebastian's happily ever after?
So she's got the deal. She's basically got her dream of running the realty center, and it all hinges on this deal, on the sale. And so she has that, and she tries to talk to her dad about, making him change his mind, but that's an obstacle that's really difficult. The biggest one that she has is that Belle is actually engaged. Oh. And so she's engaged to a man named Peter, who actually runs the realty company. And so it freaks her out because she, while she cares about Peter, obviously she doesn't have as deep a feelings as she does Sebastian, but then that totally freaks her out because she never expects to feel feelings for Sebastian, especially when she's got this other connection. Right.
Well, and him being so cold at first and not inviting and everything.
Yeah. So she really has to question herself and her loyalties. And then Sebastian, now his story is interesting because I really like my villains. And Blair is a longtime family friend, and she wants to get her hooks into Sebastian. Yeah. And I don't want to give too much away, but she's doing some pretty crazy stuff to try to keep him in her clutches. Yeah. And she's not going to be willing to let go easily. So that's kind of an interesting twist also. Yeah.
So they both have somebody on the other side that they're trying to... Well, with Belle, she's trying to decide, do I keep this or pursue this unknown? And then you also have the element of Blair being a family friend and a connection to the past, which is what he's been holding on to. So
that's exactly.
You often use the tagline, happily ever after is not just for fairy tales. Do all your books end with a happily ever after?
Absolutely. I studied literature in college, and I love reading all different types of books, but it was such a downer when I would read a book, and there was one where the whole time the book, you think it's going to end well, and the lady ends up killing herself at the end, and I get that life is hard. I mean, we know we go through some hard stuff, but I just choose to end on the high note, and so I think it's wonderful when we can read books that uplift and inspire. And yes, and even my characters, at the end, yes, they're going to live, it's a happily ever after, but you do know that they'll have other obstacles.
There'll also be challenges. Yeah. It's not just nothing's going to happen.
Right. But they face it together, and that's kind of the way I look at it. A friend of mine once told me this. She said, romance is the only genre where pretty much that they're going to get together at the end of the novel, right? Yeah. But you just don't know what their love story will be. And so when I'm writing a book, I try to think of it like that. I try to think, like you were talking about earlier, how do I make this their story? Because no two people are the same. And so really no two love stories are the same. And so that's kind of a question that I ask myself at the start of every novel. What is their happily ever after what is it going to be?
Yeah, so that's awesome. I was actually talking to my students the other day about the endings of books and the endings of their papers that they're writing. And one of them was like, I always hate it when you can tell that the author just rushed to the end and they were just trying to get done. And so another one was like, I hate when it ends in a cliffhanger. So it's nice that, in romance novels, by the end, it'll all work out, and you don't have a cliffhanger at the end, or you don't have a terrible ending. You always know it's going to be an ending that you'll end the book and be like, okay, that's great. Like, now
Yeah.
I can read something else that's uplifting or whatever. So
I think it gives us hope that despite all the challenges, that there can be happiness. I think that it does me. Like, I love that feeling of, you read the end of a book and you're like, oh, awesome. You feel like you want to fly. So, yeah.
Exactly. So, how can readers find out more about you and any upcoming books that you have? You said you have a couple that are going to be released soon. How can they get more information about that?
So a great way to do that is to go to my website at jenniferyoungblood.com, and readers can actually get Beastly Charm for free if they join my newsletter. And I have a lot of information about my books on the website. And if people want to join my newsletter, then they'll get the latest up-to-date announcements about books that are coming out. And that they'll get sales and freebies also. So it's a fun way for me to stay in touch with readers.
Yeah. And then, like you said, they can get Beastly Charm for free when they sign up for that newsletter. So they can read that as well.
Yes, they sure can.
All right. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Blue Chair Book Review. And we look forward to you tuning in with us next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.